My name is Pat Loughery, and I'm awfully proud to be an extraordinary title, Warden of Goldsmiths, St. Quentin Goldsmiths Warden. It is such a pleasure to welcome all of you here today. But this is, we believe, a vibrant, powerful place compelled by a drive towards investigation and truth. So there's no more appropriate gathering than this symposium today to be here. So on behalf of this place, thank you so very much for being here. And we want to offer particular welcome to our partners, Riva and David Logan Foundation, the Intercept, and the Goethe Institute. Without those partners, none of the rest would be possible. Looking at the amazing schedule you'll enjoy, some of which I hope to be part of and to join in with, I know that truly crucial discussions will take place over the next couple of days. And God knows we don't have far to look for the relevance of our topics at the moment to see why quality investigative journalism is needed in the world right now. The case of Jamal Khashoggi suggests that power still hates to be held to truth. And tragically, Jamal's not the only one. The one that's getting vast attention, but 43 journalists have been killed just this year. 43 journalists. It's a heavy price to pay, and so we must truly credit the bravery of all those people and their commitment to the words from the great American journalist Walter Lippmann. There can be no higher law in journalism than to tell the truth and to shame the devil. Apart from being a soot here in Goldsmiths, I also spent 30 years of my life in radio, television, journalism, mainly with the BBC, always kind of groping towards that notion of comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. Much of that time, I should gather from The Voice, was in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. And God knows there the notions were tested practically every day. And in this pursuit of truth, I was often haunted by something that Oscar Wilde said, maybe flippantly, maybe not, but in The Importance of Being Earnest, that the truth is rarely pure and never simple. I'll give you a couple of small examples from that experience, but again then we had a Conservative government under John Major at that time, publicly pronouncing that at no time would they ever speak or deal or negotiate with terrorists of any background. We knew for sure that words were one thing and actions were a different thing, and that government was indeed negotiating with terrorists and in regular contact with terrorists. As journalists, we knew the public deserved to know the humbug in public pronouncement. But as citizens, we also knew that the only possible way forward was to negotiate, to talk, to meet, and to begin what ultimately became the peace process and a resolution. We did the journalistic thing, we told the story, but we did it with some trepidation. A second example from that time. When there was no 24-hour news, the regular news bulletins were metronomes of life. And we observed that bombing incidents tended to happen mainly between 4:30 p.m. and 6 p.m. And you didn't have to be a great social scientist to figure out what was happening. Terrorists had realized maximum impact, greatest news value. We're breaking a story, we're bringing an emerging serious incident in the center of Belfast. There are apparently fatalities. The drama of an on-the-scene reporter live from an event trumped anything that they might otherwise do. So we and our schedule were being employed as part of the armory of terrorism. Were we, as Margaret Thatcher later said, the oxygen of terrorism? We're being manipulated in our schedule to bring these breathless reports just to add to the drama of the occasion. And should we, therefore, deny the public that news because it was being manipulated? We, of course, decided that that was not our calling, and we did persist with bringing news, even though we're aware that that news had, to some extent, been timed to coincide with our bulletins. These are not easy issues. Truth is not an easy thing. It has the properties of quicksilver, elusive, hard to pin down, but so worth fighting for. And we're now in an age when truth can be delivered in very different ways, different forms of analysis, vast quantities of data, and a whole different world of algorithms through which we can pursue truth, pursue analysis in a way that was not conceivable in my early days. And that's what's so exciting about this event here in Goldsmiths, where that new technology, those new devices, are being employed to explore reality and to bring light into shady areas. It's invidious in a place like this to isolate one example, but I will, because I know that our Center for Forensic Architecture will be on the schedule later. But their work in bringing a multimedia, multidisciplinary approach to disrupt and to reorder what an investigation is and can be is truly formative and groundbreaking. Their work stretches from the horrible fate of Yazidis to the reality told from 100 different perspectives, hundreds of different perspectives, the reality of Grenfell Tower. You'll gather, I wish that my schedule allowed me to spend more time with you today than I can, but I am so proud that you have chosen to be here in Goldsmiths and that we will, I know, benefit from your presence. It is our combined objective to ensure that truth remains undimmed and that journalistic investigation, despite all the horrible pressures being placed upon it, remains robust, because society without that fourth estate of truth-telling and of asking the awkward question on behalf of the disempowered is probably more necessary now than ever before. Thank you so very much for being here, and I'd now like to cue Richard.
Thank you. Good morning. My name's Richard Logan, and I'm going to be reading this stuff because my short-term memory isn't what it used to be. I'm the president of the Reverend David Logan Foundation. We are the sponsors here. And I was going to take this opportunity this morning to give you an idea of why we're here, who we are, and why we sponsor this symposium. I've decided not to do that. I'm here on the stage with two Irishmen, practitioners of a trade that a lot of you are involved in. I was in Northern Ireland, but not as a journalist. So, since I'm not going to say what I was going to say, I'm going to tell you what I was going to say. That we focus on funding people, organizations, and events who we think are pushing boundaries, creating real change, and who are fearless in the pursuit of truth, justice, and not necessarily the American way. We fund in three primary areas: investigative journalism, social justice, and the arts. Want to know more? Go to our website. I was then going to go on to say we think the world's in big trouble. Climate change, which is directly linked, we think, to the denial of human and civil rights, is out of control. And the efforts to mitigate its effects are being thwarted by corporations and their puppet governments. Everywhere, people are being disenfranchised, subjugated because of race, tribe, religion, sex. Freedom of expression and human decency are just bad jokes in a lot of places in the world. Truth is a marginal and rarely viewed commodity. Real information, the lifeblood of democracy and freedom, is being destroyed by tactics of obfuscation and confusion and the deliberate production and dissemination of lies. The list goes on and on. These are just some of the reasons why we feel compelled to sponsor this symposium. And the tone and tenor of this symposium is a reflection of our need to communicate the seriousness of what's happening in our world today. The Logan Symposium, the brainchild of my friend and too early departed colleague Gavin McFadden, was envisaged to be an opportunity for those on the bleeding edge of this existential struggle to gather, to learn from each other and share knowledge, and ultimately consolidate their efforts to combat the forces that conspire to gain absolute control over us all. Long sentence. You, and you in all your forms here, investigative journalists, hackers, whistleblowers, artists, and just citizens, are all truth seekers. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. Focusing light through the veil of secrecy and ignorance, even though you know you are candidates for retribution, exclusion, and in some cases, assassination as part of the new normal. The new normal. Any road, our foundation is here because we believe in what you do and what you can do. We believe that without you, this poisoned state of affairs will destroy society. It will destroy life itself. And of course, we believe that you are the key counteractive against the onslaught of bad actors and perhaps the greatest hope for awakening the legions of exhausted and disillusioned sleepers. I hope so. It's a longer discussion of how that's going to happen. But on a personal note, I was going to say, I'm really concerned about the why of conspiracy. I mean, here we're going to be talking about the what, the where, the who, the how, but it's the why that bothers me. And I'm sure it bothers you too. And as I ask people about that, who can figure it out? What can possibly be the end game of what's going on in the world? At any rate, thank heavens I wasn't going to say any of that stuff, and I'm done with that. What I was going to say, what I decided to say in the end, is that this is the first symposium without the aforementioned Gavin McFadden. And it's worthwhile remembering what a special person he was. For those of you who knew him, he was an extraordinary and inspirational human being. But more importantly, he would have been so pleased that the symposium has been resurrected and that the CIJ has survived and thrived. And the reason it has, partly because of Gavin's inspiration, but a lot of good people have come together. A few funders, and we take a little credit. The new board, which has been extended and rebalanced and has really made a difference. The team here at the CIJ is quite amazing. And I'd like to single out Tom Sanderson, who's out there somewhere, who's really come on leaps and bounds since I last saw him. And all the fantastic volunteers. I mean, it's been fabulous to watch the preparations for this and how things have come together. And I'm really excited about what's going to happen over the next 2 days. But all this success is in no measure, no small measure, attributable to our tremendous good fortune in finding a new leader. One who possesses the same uncompromising integrity and inexhaustible passion as the Gavster himself. I'd like you to give a round of applause, just to embarrass him. And I give you the director of the Center of Investigative Journalism, James Harkin. Applause.
So thanks for those kind words, Richard. Much appreciated. We have a lot to get through today, so I won't take up much of your time, other than to thank you for making the time to come to this unique global meeting of minds. The CIJ Logan Symposium, as Richard just said, was the inspiration of my predecessor, Gavin McFadden, together with Richard. And the idea was to open out and refresh investigative journalism by drawing in new allies, be they hackers, artists, experts, lawyers, ordinary citizens, in investigative journalism's time of need, to help it build alliances around extremely pressing issues: official deceit, subterfuge, propaganda, surveillance. And the result, I can safely promise you, is like no other conference on earth. So at Symposium, we don't really do celebrities or prima donnas or UN goodwill ambassadors. Many of the people that you'll meet in the next couple of days aren't very famous. We've handpicked them because we think that they're at the avant-garde, the advanced guard of investigative journalism, doing great work, often for little reward, sometimes at great risk to themselves. And the reason why you're here is because you recognize that too, that these people are worth hearing from and interesting, and that's what makes you much more to us than an audience and more of a community that is still evolving. So welcome back, some of you. So this third iteration of the symposium, the first post-Gavin, has as its theme conspiracy. And there's a reason for that. The reason why we're interested in conspiracy, and the conspiracy theories are on all sides today, is because as investigative journalists, we have a dog in this fight, because one of the very worst things about the rise of conspiracy theories, conspiracy thinking, is that they sort of ruin it for the rest of us. They distract from and delegitimize the kind of critical thinking that we do, that we champion, and that we think is more important than ever. Journalism is changing. And the danger is, as we move towards a model in which journalism was paid for by an audience, towards a model in which it's paid for by big tech companies, big foundations, big NGOs. And some of them do great work, but the danger is that journalism becomes a little bit samey. The product becomes a little bit samey, sometimes a little worthy. The danger is that we all move our investigative weaponry in one direction. At Symposium, we stand up for a slightly different tradition. We stand up for people who sometimes are prepared to go against the grain, to ask difficult questions, to make trouble, even occasionally to ask their employer, why are you asking me to investigate this thing rather than this other thing? One of the first conversations I had with Richard after taking the job ended with Richard saying to me, well, you know, why don't you investigate us then? Who knows? Maybe we will. There's another reason why we want to talk about conspiracy. Because amid all of this talk about post-truth and fake news, and you can't move now for conferences about post-truth and fake news and people writing articles about it, and this slightly insidious new industry of hiring free-floating fact-checkers rather than real journalists. We want to argue that real, independent, truth-seeking investigative journalism is the only real antidote, the solution to many of our current woes. Because, what is truth? I mean, questions like that are very interesting on a Sunday afternoon if you're watering the plants. Or in your first year at university, if you're trying to get laid. But the wonderful thing about investigative journalism is that truth is an extremely practical thing. Either your story is true or it's not. And once we're all on the same terrain of truth, well, then there's room for reasonable disagreement. Because the truth is there, and there's only one truth, but it's always provisional, and it's always being worked upon. Nowadays, there's a temptation that if you disagree with someone's journalism, it's easy to say, maybe they're paid by the CIA, maybe they're paid by the GRU, the Russian security services. And I think that's a little cynical. I don't think there's anyone in this room who's paid by the CIA or the Russian security services. If we were, we'd have a lot more money. We'd probably dress better. It reminds me of something that Edward Snowden said on Betsy's podcast at The Intercept when he was asked about a very lurid article in the New York Review of Books which suggested, with not a lot of evidence, that he was a Russian agent. And his reply was interesting. He said, well, hell, maybe I am a Russian agent, but, show me some proof. Shake a leg, do some work, do some research, investigate.